we're going to be talking about ecosystem, and I think trying to unpack that a little bit. And I think Scott helps us bring together a lot of the other pieces that are not really in your day-to-day. In my work with Stanford Biodesign and most of the technical founders I work with, we're really on the front end of the train. But I think as you look around the panels that Scott puts together and you see the people that are here, you really get to see the entire swath of what goes on to get a product, to go from ideas to idea into products that enter markets. And then once you're in a market, there's a whole lot of people here who will tell you how to scale. So when I look at ecosystem, I think about it from that level, but then I also see it on a much larger level. That if you think about a landscape painting, where are you? What's the whole panoply that's out there? And then there's individual portraits within that, the people that you work with, your vendors, your suppliers, the physicians you serve, even the patients or hospital systems. But then down even lower than that, much more intimate, is the Polaroid. I like it, the little snapshot. And as a gag, some of you might have seen it, I brought a Keith Haring Polaroid camera. Love Keith Haring. And if you just, even holding a Polaroid camera, people will laugh immediately. I thought it was interesting at the Stanford D School that even though these are some of the most advanced students and they're doing incredibly crazy, hardcore technology, when they take their team pictures on a digital camera, they print it out in the format of the Polaroid. And they take a Sharpie and they write their names on the bottom, just like they did with a Polaroid before many of these kids were ever even born. So I think it's very much fun to bring in that idea of prototyping. And for myself, just that prototype, none of those pictures came out. I even went out later last night, a little bit earlier. So trying to get, it's exactly like prototyping. Just trying to get some of my friends together, let's get one good picture. We tried to take a picture last night. It just never came in. And that happens too. But all those things happen. The big picture, the little tiny prototype snapshots you try to take, all of that takes place inside of your ecosystem. How big is it? How diverse is it? Do you have people, friends, relationships, colleagues that are in all those other areas? Those are some of the things that we're going to explore here. So we've got 3 examples. I'm going to have my friends introduce themselves, but we've got 3 examples here of different systems at different times, and then a lot of it in the work I'm doing right now with all of them, trying to bring that deepening of relationship. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Sue and let her tell us about a little tiny project that she ran back in Massachusetts. Sue.
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be part of the conversation, and I'll say really quickly, I'm from the generation when those Polaroids that was really an innovative thing, so I'm glad to see them making them exactly. I'm Sue Wyndham Bannister, a recent transplant to California from Boston. Spent the first half of my career working with companies on their go-to-market strategies and helped launch a number of blockbusters. And then the second half of my career started when I got a call from Governor Deval Patrick to ask if I would stand up and lead the initiative in Massachusetts to transform ourselves from a research hub to a real innovation ecosystem. So let me just say a little bit about that at a very high level, as Ben said, and then I'm really looking forward to this conversation. One of the most important points that I hope you'll take away from my comments this morning is that the innovation ecosystem that you see in Massachusetts now was not always there. All of those pieces, all of those resources were not there. And our ecosystem did not evolve organically in a way that, say, the Bay Area has. What you see in Massachusetts now is really the result of intentional and strategic investment by a public-private partnership that was initiated in 2008. It's a 15-year, $1.5 billion investment to really make Massachusetts an innovation hub, not just a great research center, but where we translate and develop and commercialize new technology in Massachusetts. The secret sauce for making that happen is a highly collaborative ecosystem. And I want to show really quickly, many of us talk about an ecosystem, but what we're really talking about is a cluster. And we had a cluster in Massachusetts. We had, our academic institutions and the like. We had a fledgling biotech industry. But as someone said to me, a lot of smart people, we don't play well in the sandbox together. And so the real difference, and what we worked very hard on in Massachusetts with our investments, is to transform the cluster which is a collection of your assets. If you're counting, if you're talking about we have this many of that, this many of this, you're talking about a cluster. But in an ecosystem, all of those resources, all of those members work together. They work well individually, they work well collaboratively. And it's really through the ecosystem that you generate the leverage on the cluster. So as I like to say, 1 + 1 = 11. Why does an ecosystem matter? It's because the resources, the support systems, the people, the infrastructure, the investors are available. They're working together. As I said, they're creating leverage and they're building that platform of support and resources that the life sciences life cycle needs, from discovery all the way through development. Again, as I said, a cluster does not always organically become an ecosystem. There are 5 A's, and you can see them here very quickly: having a shared aspiration and vision, advocating and publicizing, advisory and mentoring resources participate. It's not just the scientists, it's not just the investors, it's the alignment of the stakeholders, competencies and value proposition, and their incentives. There's a value exchange, there's a reason to be part of the ecosystem. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today, learning from my colleagues and just sharing with you in a bit more detail how we did what we did in Massachusetts. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiff Wilson. I'm the president and CEO of the University City Science Center based in Philadelphia. So for context, a little bit about my background. If you would ask me 20 years ago, would I be leading a nonprofit, working this closely with universities and healthcare systems in Philadelphia, I'm like, why would I ever want to do that? And so it kind of really leads to the importance of Sue's comments around the importance of ecosystem. So I spent the first part of my career in consulting and investment banking, and got involved in raising money for a tissue engineering company out of Boston 20 years ago. Joined the management team of that company, spent a decade in that company and another med tech company, living every single challenge that one faces on their pathway from concept to patient. And about 10 years ago, had the privilege of building, to operationalize the Global Center for Medical Innovation in Atlanta, Georgia. And so when I read about the concept of a place that could help bring together the ecosystem, all the assets there, all the infrastructure is there, but you really needed someone to bring that together. I got it, because had I had access to something like that when I was in DC 10 years prior to that, it would have been a game changer in terms of speed to market. And so that was my kind of entry into this weird world that I call of innovation, entrepreneurship, and talent, and the weirdness of bringing all these things together, but the importance of it to really help early stage companies get to where they need to be, and which is having an impact in patients' lives. And so I've been at the Science Center for 18 months now. I joined in October 2020, and that's a whole nother panel on how to join a new organization in a new city during a global pandemic. But the Science Center, what's inspiring to me about it, and what really drew me to Philadelphia, is the Science Center's been around for 60 years. It is the oldest urban research technology park in the country. We're located in University City, West Philadelphia, and what's inspiring to me is that we have 31 shareholders. And so for those of you who are familiar with working with universities and healthcare systems, they don't always get along so much.
No?
They don't.
Oh,
They
Tiff,
don't.
that's shocking.
But somehow, these organizations have agreed that there's the importance of a innovation intermediary. And we started off as a real estate play to really build out lab space to house life science companies spinning out of Penn and Drexel and CHOP, Jefferson, Temple. These are all organizations around us. But have really evolved into, we've got the real estate and that asset base, which is wonderful as a nonprofit, But we've developed a series of programs around 4 key pillars. And so those are really, how do we help early stage companies commercialize their technology? So move from a prototype to first product, generate first revenue, raise first capital, hire first employees. The Science Center has built some tremendous work around STEM education and workforce development. So we have a program called First Hand, where we bring middle school and high school students in underserved schools into the Science Center during the school day, where they work in a dedicated lab, and they're mentored by scientists that reside on our campus in all these cell and gene therapy companies, biotech companies, technology companies, and it's just wonderful to see. And then we've got our workforce development program engages with adults with a high school diploma or GED in West Philadelphia to really provide the technical training needed to go and work in the technical jobs in all of these industries that are growing. We're a convener, so we're the Venture Cafe partner in Philadelphia. We have a mini conference every Thursday from 3 to 8, and have continued that through the pandemic to really bring people together to inspire action. And then finally, we have a new pillar as part of the strategic plan that I put together last year around capital. And so really, how do we address some of these, particularly in the emerging medtech space, seed and Series A capital for medical device and healthcare technology. So we're just about to kick that fund off, but I'm excited about the path forward.
Thank you, Tiff.
Yep.
So now, magically, without traffic or having to change planes, we're going to land in Los Angeles. Jennifer's going to tell us about Westwood and the UCLA health system, which she's been taking a leading role in bringing the biodesign principles into the UCLA health system. So Jennifer, tell us more about that.
Thank you, Ben. And of course,
There's 5 hospitals there? No, wait, 6.
It's still 4, but we are number 3 in the nation. I'm just excited to be here today with Sue and Tiff and Ben. I myself am a Boston native, so I'm a Los Angeles transplant. And the first thing I thought when I got here, well, how are we going to turn a cluster into an ecosystem when we have 2 basketball teams in the same town and people can't even decide which one they're rooting for? So I think it's really, Los Angeles is a unique region, and certainly thank you to Scott and the LSI team for bringing this conference to our backyard, because I think it's so fantastic to see all the investors, see all the strategics, see the entrepreneurs coming here to convene, like Tiff said, and really help to build up that ecosystem from a global lens, really, what we're seeing here this week. One of the things that is unique about UCLA is that we're sitting in Southern California. So in Southern California, in the Los Angeles region, we produce more PhDs. So we've got Caltech that produces the most number of PhDs in the country. UCLA ranks number 1 for startups among universities globally based on university-derived IP. And so we have some very unique assets, and of course you couple that with the creative underpinnings of the entertainment and media industry that are often considered sort of the hallmarks when we think about Hollywood, right? So when we think about Los Angeles. And what we've seen most recently is Los Angeles actually ranked number 4 in the nation for health tech because of those creative synergies that are starting to come together and build the ecosystem that Sue mentioned. Myself, I'm a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm a mechanical engineer who's a business school and a medical school professor. I think that is often an advantage, because when I go in, I kind of think, well, how do we fix it? How do we build it, is sort of the lens that I look at it. And what we've done at UCLA is take a health system-centered approach to cultivating innovation. UCLA Health is an extremely unique health system. We're part of the UC Health California-wide health system. We have more than 21 million patients that we treat. And so in launching the biodesign program a few years ago at UCLA, we've really taken a patient-centered approach to innovation, as well as a community-centered approach to innovation. When we think about how do we build innovation ecosystems, we have to think about engaging community, we have to think about diversity, and how do we leverage diverse assets. So for example, at UCLA Biodesign, half of our leadership team is female, and half of our leadership team are persons of color. And so we want our leadership in our innovation ecosystem to represent the community that we serve. And I'll pause there, because I know we have a lot of other points to discuss that Ben has on the agenda.
Well, I'll pick up with that, Jennifer. And so I think in this last year, the group of fellows, I think we had the first time that we had the feedback loop. I always talk about the work I do with Jennifer, it's catch and release. And Jennifer had made a post recently, which it didn't really occur to me, but what we're actually doing is training the leadership within UCLA Health. Because we have clinicians coming in, we have engineers coming in. You know, Jennifer is like luring I don't know, wolf in sheep clothing, but the Pied Piper, luring all of those business school students over. And even in programming that we had done there, finding out that business students are not invited to talk with technical people, or the technical people are not thinking to reach out to business school students. So Jennifer, it was interesting to see that first feedback loop where we had, how did you hear about the program? I always ask them, how did you hear about this and how's it going for you? And they had talked to one of the early students, and now that word had gotten out. So I think that's another element of ecosystem, is almost that evangelization. It was a good experience for me. Believe it or not, I talked to data scientists, I survived the conversation. And that, because people don't understand how other people think and talk. So Jennifer, can you pick up on that feedback loop that's happening?
Yeah, I bet. And it's a great, and there's a few pieces, I think, of that feedback loop that are so important. One is to kind of see leaders, interact with leaders that kind of look and share the same experience as you do. And so one of the things that we are involved in here in Los Angeles, there's a consortium called Pledge LA, which is a group of investors that are committed to building a diverse group of stakeholders in our ecosystem. And so we're part of that Pledge LA. Bioscience LA is of course involved. And the other piece in that, in terms of building diverse leadership and then building that network. So whether or not it's an organic network like Silicon Valley, or some of us are having to actually do the analysis, build the strategic plan, identify the gaps, and really fill those in. And so creating those opportunities for connection are so important, especially when we're now in kind of a decentralized workforce environment where we're all working virtually. How much harder do we have to work, and how do we create those tangible touch points? I think is something that we've been able to successfully do through the pandemic, because we were pulled in by that center of gravity at the health system where we had that urgent need. We had fellows going out, traditionally in a biodesign program, many of you know, you go out, you do an externship, you go to a strategic, you go to a design firm. Our fellows came in, they 3D printed swabs, they built masks, they did it all over the course of a year, and they really came together. So we're always pulled in together by that patient-driven mission that we have at the health system. And I think that many of us are here at this conference because we ultimately want to impact patient care, and that creates that feedback loop, because you have that shared enthusiasm and shared mission.
Sue, did you have something?
Well, I'm really resonating with what you're saying, with what you both have said, and thinking of that in Massachusetts, one of the ways in which we sort of coalesced this ecosystem was to make investments that required collaboration. So as an example, we'll take infrastructure as an example. Massachusetts, believe it or not, was lacking commercial lab space, incubating space, accelerating space. So one of the investments that we made was to provide the seed funding for something called Lab Central, which some of you may have heard of. It sits in Kendall Square. It's a co-working space. Industry and investors wrap around it and sponsor the companies that come into, they curate them, they sponsor them to come into Lab Central, and that money provides the operating costs. But who was going to actually create a space like that? I mean, who would see it as their responsibility? So having this public-private entity, the Life Sciences Center, gave the seed funding in 3 rounds of expansion money, and that, you know, Lab Central has a 200-plus alum company. They've created thousands of jobs. 70% of them have stayed in Kendall Square. So all of these things, again, just adding to that ecosystem. One more example is we were missing a lot of venture capital. Hard to believe, but we really were. And so one of the things that this Life Sciences Initiative did was to actually make money available. We funded young companies, not in a traditional venture model, but as a way of partnering with strategics and institutionals to de-risk early stage companies. So Moderna, that's one of the first companies that we put some money in. Bluebird Bio, and there are a lot of companies out there that you will have heard of. We helped get them down the pathway so that they were less risky investments. And so you begin to build your ecosystem in that way. You know, you have investors who say, well, too early for us, but maybe this public-private partnership will put some money. They will think about filling in some of our gaps in workforce, in infrastructure. So you build this ecosystem in part by providing resources, but making it a requirement that people work together collaboratively to access those resources. So that was a big part of our strategy.
Tiffany, are you seeing that? I always think about, as I've gotten to know the Science Center more with Tiff being there, I almost see it as this Switzerland that, you want to make this neutral ground. I'm wondering if as you're hearing these comments, if you're thinking now about your fund, you've pivoted to be completely, to dedicate the center to the life sciences.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any models there that you might adopt or you're already seeing in play?
Yeah, I mean, the importance, and I don't think we think about this enough as an industry, and, granted, all of y'all are building your companies, right? So you're not thinking about this stuff, but we understand kind of in the background what needs to happen to bring these ecosystems together. And it's like the importance of like state government, right? And in election cycles, and how do you convince, state legislators who aren't in the life sciences industry, and they may only care about, like in their district, agriculture or something like that, but recognizing why it takes so much money to build out this infrastructure. And certainly over a 60-year period, the Science Center in Philadelphia has been able to figure that out, and there is tremendous business and civic leadership in Philadelphia. I don't know, prior to moving there, like I had no idea all this stuff was happening there. And there's a certain level of, everybody's seen Rocky, right? I've seen it like 5 times since I joined the science. I'm just inspired by the story and the grit and the coming togetherness of it to figure it out.
And the stairs are really there.
Stairs are really there.
And so is the statue, right?
So is the statue. It's fantastic. But there's been a tremendous investment in the community, by the state and the federal government. EDA has played a big role in providing grant funding for our programs. But I do, look at playbooks of other cities and how they're doing it, and it is a quirky space to be in to figure out how to get all these people together. Jen, you talking about how all these different disciplines come together. We've seen in this industry over the last decade just the convergence of everything and the need to see technologists and clinicians work together in a way that they haven't in the past. And I see that continuing in Philly. We have a tremendous cell and gene therapy platform. And, you can raise your hand if you're an esteemed faculty member at Penn, and all of a sudden $100 million will fall out of the sky. And that doesn't really happen in our industry. But there's tremendous opportunity for kind of ancillary stuff. And that's where I'm really excited to bring my med tech background, to bring that structure to the Philadelphia region, where there is a tremendous amount of medical device innovation, a tremendous amount of digital health innovation. It just needs to come together more as a cohesive ecosystem.
Can I make a quick comment that both of you have made, Jen and Tiff, because you talk about the academic institutions, the medical centers, and our universities. And one of the, I think, really important levers and push points in building an ecosystem is getting the academic institutions to realize what an important role they play, not just in training talent and not just in their basic science, but really getting them engaged in recognizing that they're partners in translating and developing and being more collaborative, right? Recognizing that they are a source of most of the new technology that becomes young companies. And so expanding the culture and the interest to think about the role that they play, as MIT calls itself, a factory for young companies, which very few academic institutions would think of themselves that way.
Yeah.
But I'm really very respectful and understand so much the hard work that you're both doing to really get those institutions to think of themselves more broadly.
And that's really hard. And so some universities get it, and some just absolutely do not.
Well, Sue said the T word, translation, And it really, I think what I'm beginning to see, so I credit Moose O'Donnell. There's a few people that I credit for, I call my radicalization, which was, oh yeah, Ben, there's a whole lot of other parts of the health tech system other than the very front end, helping people protect their shiny objects. And you look at Moose, great attitude, right? Well, Berkeley, we've got all these engineers, we've got all this technology. We're a little bit short of hospitals. UCSF saying, we've got all these hospitals. We're alarmingly short of engineers and technologies. And Moose and the MTM program, Masters of Translational Medicine, is bridging that gap. And then there's initiatives now at NIH that also look at the translational scientist. And one of the problems we're facing, and you'll see it, talk to any of the companies that are here, and even some of the initiatives that are down here in Octane, the southern end of California, and all the universities are here. We can pump out all the computer scientists in the world. We can ravage Carnegie Mellon of every graduate they have. Who's going to teach them about healthcare? Yeah. Who's going to show these young kids, these brilliant minds, you could make more difference in a patient's life? Don't think about a consumer's life. And so I wonder how we're going to do that. How do you think translation is going to help us? Is ecosystem where translation happens? That's a question
for me,
for any of you.
Or anyone. Go ahead.
Why don't I take it first, and I'll pass it down the line. Sue, I'm so glad you brought up translation. I'm an associate director at our Clinical and Translational Science Institute in Los Angeles, which is a hub between Cedars, UCLA, Charles Drew, and Harbor. And one of the things that we do is we work together to translate new technology. And so when we're thinking about innovation ecosystems, the classic seat that I sit is right in that biodesign, we're going to spin out new technology. And I think that's fantastic, and we all know the model works. But at the end, you have to be able to translate it and bring it back in. And so at UCLA Biodesign, we actually have a third program. We have a traditional postgrad fellowship, we have a faculty program, and we have a third pillar. It's our translational fellowship. And it's specifically focused at recruiting fellows to help bring technology back into the health system. Because for all of you in the room, I'm sure you've spent a time where it's 12 months to get an IRB, 2 years to get a pilot launch, maybe 3 years during COVID. And it's for some reason that translational tipping point of bringing technology back in, whether it's due to reimbursement or workflow or infrastructure challenges, it's extremely difficult. And so one of the gaps, and Sue does this great sort of metaphor where she talks about finding the gaps in your cluster and addressing those. One of the gaps that I've seen, and this is not specific to Los Angeles, is how do you get the tech back in? Yeah. How do you get it into the hands of the physicians so they can get it to the patients? And so this translational fellowship that we launched is specifically looking at training folks how to do that. And we have 2 projects we piloted this year. One is with a small startup, one is with a large corporate that's under NDA, so I can't say more than that. But it's been going swimmingly well, because we're not only are we training people how to do this, how do you execute this on a time frame that makes sense, right? Even though some things like getting an MTAP is only going to happen once a year, some of those things haven't changed, but our job as in terms of a health system center is to do it better and do it faster.
That's a really great point, and getting back to your question too, and just adding on to what Jen has said, I think that an ecosystem enables translation. Oh, yeah. Because translation, development, commercialization, this is a collaborative process. Yes. And you may have some of the resources in your cluster, but if they're not integrated to create that platform, that runway that it takes to do the translation, to get to commercialization, what often happens is you don't have any stickiness. Entrepreneurs say, I can't stay here. There's no operating talent. An investor says, love that you started your company here, but I need you to move to X, because you will find the community, the resources, the operating talent, et cetera, the mentors that you need to grow. And so we are going to invest in you, but you cannot stay here. So I think that the ecosystem enables it to happen, because the resources are coalesced, they're leveraged, people know each other, they know where to get things, they know how to get things done. People take your phone calls, yes. People will mentor you. And otherwise it stalls, it never gets started, or it migrates. Capital migrate, people migrate. So the ecosystem, I think, enables it. That's the secret sauce.
Yeah, and I'll just add, what's neat, so in Philadelphia, in the tri-state region, so Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, there's like 12 million lives under care. And so just the density of, and the willingness to collaborate there, if I'm thinking from a mindset of an early stage med tech company, the ability to get inputs from supply chain, inputs from key opinion leaders, inputs from not only academic medical centers, but community healthcare centers too, right? So all the different points of care quickly. Over the last decade, as I've been in this, as I refer to the weird world of innovation and entrepreneurship around healthcare, I've heard increasingly, I know all of y'all have experienced this as well, hey, Tiff, getting through FDA is like not a thing anymore. It's not, we're not whining about that anymore. But I can't get into the healthcare system. I can't get sales. And then at the same time, I've seen a lot of new innovation platforms in healthcare systems where everyone wants the innovation, but they're not including the operating side of it. And so there's all these new ideas that clinicians are coming up with, and then they bring it to, I'm going to make that, I'm going to bring it into the OR and test my prototype. And then supply chain finds out, and they're like, no, you're not going to do that. Right? And oh, by the way, I don't want to buy that ever. And so, you have to if we think about innovation ecosystems, we've got to include not only the shiny, sexy part of innovation, but the hard, pragmatic integration for how do you actually get that in the healthcare system. And I think we understand that more now, but I think that's an important part of the translational equation, if you will.
Even over breakfast this morning, I was talking about, I want to see our hospital systems. Those are becoming incredible networks that are already integrated, but how do we make them innovation ready so we can actually deploy that? I'd love to see the U.S. turn into a team of teams. Kelly McChrystal talked about, so it really is that difficult. It is, I look on a lot of my Navy experience, joint force with all the different operating units. We're not really made to work with each other, but when you have common mission, it's very clarifying, particularly when you're being shot at. So I think if we can get that kind of that spirit of, we're all focused on the patient, we're all focused on advancing the standard of care, that can help kind of bring some.
And how do we link together all these ecosystems? So
Exactly.
I think of Philly as a living lab, right? So we've got all the assets, the infrastructure, the talent. For better or worse, we have problems. A lot of healthcare disparity is something that I'm focused on.
We learned that in COVID.
It's a big spotlight on it, kind of like these bright lights on, health disparities.
Well, based on what we did last night, I thought we were back in the lineup at the Sheriff's Department. We showed that last night, that we sat down to sort of gather our thoughts. We could talk all night, but we've got a few minutes left. I want to see if we can, we'll be polite and throw it out. Any questions? And for the House Manager, do we need a mic, or how are we going to do this? Oh, no microphone for you. Oh, good. Use your outside voice.
5 kids, I'm loud. I live in the greater Philadelphia area, and it's more of a comment, right? If you look at Seattle and if you look at Boston, every one of the healthcare ecosystem organizations is now competing with Google, is now competing with Meta, aka Facebook. In fact, both those buildings went up in Cambridge over the last 10 years.
That's right.
So what a beautiful opportunity you all have as a link to students to get them interested at the undergrad and grad level in what's going on in healthcare and solving patient issues, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't get them involved and interested early on, they're going to go work for Google. They're going to go work for Amazon. 1 out of every 170 employees in this country works for Amazon. I know a lot of that's warehousing. 1 out of 100 work for Walmart. And this is only going to increase. So you're in an unenviable and really critical position and opportunity to get people interested in saving lives.
Well, even
Right, so how do we do that,
even
Tiff?
at the middle school and high school level, you can't be what you can't see.
That's right.
Right, and so, really kind of getting that in there to do well and to do good which is
Yes.
such a, common thread across this industry. But I'll just kind of end by saying, kind of on the living lab concept and kind of bringing together the ecosystems, we can pilot stuff out in Philadelphia, but that doesn't equate to successful commercialization. So to be able to know Jen, right, and have the tie into LA, and to say, all right, this is what we did here. What do we need to, to infuse into that process, and how can we do a pilot with you? And how can we go to Massachusetts and do that? Because that really kind of creates that competitiveness for U.S. medtech.
Two quick thoughts to what you said. One, I agree with you, and as the life sciences was really coalescing in Massachusetts, guess who showed up? A lot of the big tech companies came, right? And so you're absolutely. What we did in Massachusetts, the Life Sciences Center, I think since 2008, maybe has spent $20+ million on internships. So literally giving stipends for young people to go and work in startup companies, because again, we want them to have the exposure to the young companies, to think about entrepreneurship, to help build operating talent. So one way is to actually build ramps into the industry and get to see all the different skill sets that our industry uses, and real-world experience for folks. So that's just one way that we begin to address that in Massachusetts.
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you all so much for coming in here on day 3 of Scott Pentel's 3-day wedding reception, to the LSI EdTech 2022. And I want to thank Tiffany, Sue, and Jennifer for coming out and braving this terrible, terrible, beautiful morning down here in Dana Point. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.